Imagine a battlefield where the fate of nations hangs in the balance. It is June 22nd, 1476. The armies of Charles the Bold, Duke of Burgundy, face off against the Swiss Confederacy near the lakeside town of Morat. The air is heavy with tension, banners flap in the wind, and soldiers grip their weapons knowing that in mere moments, thousands will decide whether Burgundy's ambition will reshape Europe or be buried in the mud of Switzerland. This is not just a clash of men, but of ideals, the feudal might of a wealthy duchy against the fierce independence of a confederation forged by mountain warriors. And what will unfold here will become one of the most brutal and decisive battles of the late Middle Ages. The Battle of Morat was not a random skirmish, but the explosive culmination of Charles the Bold's relentless drive to carve a Burgundian empire stretching from the North Sea to the Mediterranean. As historian Richard Vaughan emphasizes in Charles the Bold, the last Valois Duke of Burgundy, Charles, saw himself not merely as a duke, but as a king in everything but name a ruler destined to challenge the balance of power in Europe. Yet, in his path stood the Swiss, a coalition of free peasants and citizen soldiers, men who had no king, no aristocratic overlord, and who fought not for conquest, but for survival and liberty. Their unity and their ferocity had already been proven 2 years earlier at Grandson, where Charles suffered a humiliating defeat. Morat, then, was his chance at revenge and perhaps redemption. Charles assembled a formidable force. Chroniclers speak of nearly 30,000 men, including Burgundian knights clad in plate armor, English longbowmen hired as mercenaries, artillery crews managing heavy bombards, and a corps of disciplined infantry. Against them stood roughly 25,000 Swiss pikemen, halberdiers, and crossbowmen, organized into massive phalanxes called Gewalthafen. Historian Hans Delbrück, in his monumental history of the art of war, highlights that the Swiss brought something unique to late medieval warfare, the disciplined mass infantry assault, a style that foreshadowed the dominance of infantry in the early modern period. In other words, Morat was not just about Burgundy versus Switzerland, it was about the future of war itself. The battlefield stretched near the shores of Lake Morat, a natural barrier that shaped the Swiss strategy. They formed up in dense squares, their pikes bristling like a moving wall of steel. The Burgundians, confident in their artillery and cavalry, believed they could break the Swiss lines with firepower and shock. Yet Charles made a critical mistake. He deployed his men too early and kept them waiting under the summer sun for hours, expecting the Swiss to attack first. Instead, the Confederates bided their time, hidden by forests, before erupting in a furious counteroffensive. The opening moments were catastrophic for Burgundy. As Swiss drums thundered and horns blared, their columns emerged from the woods in perfect cohesion, slamming into the Burgundian lines. Burgundian artillery fired desperately, but the Swiss absorbed the barrage and closed ranks, advancing relentlessly. Chronicler Diebold Schilling describes it as an unstoppable tide of steel, a storm of pikes that shattered all who stood before it. The longbowmen tried to stem the tide, but the Swiss advance was too rapid, too disciplined. What followed was chaos. Swiss halberdiers hacked through armored men at arms, pike blocks pierced through cavalry charges, and the Burgundian army, once one of the most feared in Europe, began to collapse. The rout that followed was merciless. Thousands of Burgundians were cut down as they fled, many drowning in Lake Morat, their bodies floating to shore 4 days afterward. Historian Philippe Contamine, in War in the Middle Ages, stresses that this was more than a military defeat, it was a psychological catastrophe that shattered Burgundian prestige. And here is where we must pause because this story is more than medieval bloodshed. It is a timeless lesson about ambition, resilience, and the clash of values. If you rate captivated by how battles like Morat shape the destiny of nations and want to dive deeper into the forgotten corners of military history, make sure to subscribe to the channel. Every week, we bring you stories of courage, strategy, and the turning points that forged our world. Don't just watch history, be part of it. Now, back to Morat. The slaughter was staggering. Estimates suggest that up to 10,000 Burgundians fell, while Swiss losses were minimal in comparison. The disproportion was so extreme that chroniclers spoke of divine justice, as if God himself had favored the Swiss cause. Charles the Bold escaped with his life, but his reputation was in ruins. Less than a year later, at the Battle of Nancy, he would meet his end, his dream of a Burgundian empire crushed forever. As historian Johan Huizinga notes in The Waning of the Middle Ages, the death of Charles symbolized the death of medieval chivalric ambition itself, clearing the way for the rise of centralized nation-states and modern warfare. But the legacy of Morat endured. For the Swiss Confederacy, it was a defining moment, a validation of their collective strength, and a warning to any who underestimated them. Their infantry tactics would inspire military thinkers across Europe and play a crucial role in the transition from feudal knights to professional armies. For Burgundy, it was a lesson in hubris, a reminder that even wealth and power cannot overcome discipline, unity, and resolve. The Battle of Morat stands as one of those pivotal moments in history where the world shifts in the span of a single day. A Grand Duke's dream drowned in blood and water. A confederation of mountain warriors proved that courage and cohesion could overcome armor and artillery. And Europe took one more step out of the Middle Ages and into the dawn of a new era. This, then, is why Morat is remembered. Not merely for the carnage, but for the meaning behind it. It is a story of ambition undone, of ordinary men shaping extraordinary events, and of the eternal truth that in war, numbers and wealth mean nothing if the heart of the soldier falters. As the chronicles remind us, the fields around Morat ran red that summer day. But from that blood was written a lesson that echoes still. Power is fragile, but unity endures. And so, the story ends not with Burgundy triumphant, but with Charles the Bold broken, his empire to be shattered by men who refused to bow. The Swiss marched home not just as victors, but as legends. Their victory at Morat was not just theirs, it was a warning to all Europe. That is the legacy of June 22nd, 1476. And that is why the Battle of Morat remains one of the most epic clashes in the annals of history.